Welcome back to day 2 of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, the 2020 virtual edition. And we're all hoping that this is the only virtual edition we ever have to do, right guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing. We're playing it safe. We hope that you're staying with us and sitting at home and sipping with us and enjoying this. Today we're going to talk a bit about Bottle and Bond whiskey. In fact, this is the Bottle and Bond happy hour. We got our drinks here. We hope you have one at home as well, and have washed a couple of our cocktail glasses. Absolutely. Talk about that. It's your 6-year Bottle and Bond, as a matter of fact. We want you to sit back, enjoy the conversation, and we hope you learn a bit from this. So my guest, oh, by the way, I'm Steve Coombs, your host. My guests this afternoon are Shane Baker and Pat Heist, the co-founders, co-owners, and the masters of all that happens at Wilderness Trail Distillery in Danville, Kentucky. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today. Yeah.
This is a new experience, so I have to say I'm excited.
New in what respect? You're drinking whiskey and you're talking about it. So
All I can say is I'm excited because there's whiskeys in front of us, and but I'm missing the crowd.
Yeah, we're all missing the crowd. That's kind of a bummer. These are the whiskeys, by the way. If you haven't seen them, this is Wilderness Trail. These are, how many of them are Bottle and Bond here that we have? We have a couple of cask strengths.
Three out of the 4 are Bottle and Bond.
So let's talk about that for just a second, about Bottle and Bond in general. This was a law put into effect in 1897 by, it was Colonel E. H. Taylor, right? Really pushed for it.
He really pushed for it. Yeah.
Pushed for it because they needed pure whiskey. A lot of it was adulterated with garbage. We'll just leave it at that. And this insisted on some pretty strict, rules and guidelines for these whiskeys. Do you want me to do it, or you guys want to jump in and talk about what they are?
We can jump in there.
There are four key ones, all right?
Yeah, they have to be all made from the same distiller. They all have to come from the same distilling season. So
which is either
January through June or July through December. They all have to be bottled at 100 proof. And they have to all be stored in a bonded facility on the distillery's grounds. So that pretty much all ties it back to that distiller produced it, fermented it, distilled it, aged it, and bottled it. So that's kind of the Quality Act kind of came around of you don't have to guess where it comes from.
Well, it also implies that it's at least 4 years old.
And it's at least 4 years old.
That's right.
Yeah, the most important.
So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck to make Bottle and Bond whiskeys. Am I right? I mean, it's not like anything's easy in the distilling business, but you've got to follow these strict rules.
Right.
How does that encumber your operations? Would you rather not do them, because you do a bunch of them? So apparently you like doing them.
We do. It is a little bit of more of a planning type of thing, because again, we're talking about, if you're looking at our small batch, we have to make sure we're staying inside of that season. We don't really worry about it too much with our single barrel, because it's always going to be wherever it came from. So those things do come into a lot of planning, but really from the beginning, it was something that we knew that we were going to do. And so we were prepared for all the idiosyncrasies that came along with the process.
As a new producer, any time you get into a business and you invest for 4 years before you start selling anything, that's a little bit of a challenge as well.
Yeah, talk about that, because you guys insisted on waiting until these were Bottle and Bond, or at least 4 years old, before you released them. You had a vodka and you had a rum, but you weren't moving on the whiskey. You weren't going to source it from anybody. And you really made a commitment. Why were you so stern on that?
Well,
it's a mark of excellence.
We grew up in Kentucky, so I've had family in the distilling industry since the 40s. And so when you think of the bourbons we enjoy, the bourbons we drink, they're mature bourbons. And so our first goal coming out of it was, we want to make a mature bourbon. And so now you start breaking down what is a mature Kentucky bourbon. And for us, the minimal of that would have been a 4-year-old whiskey. So we knew from where we wanted to go quality, where we knew we wanted to really lay our first whiskey out into the market to be, considered a great Kentucky whiskey. It had to go a minimum of that far. We were super busy during the entire process, because we had Firm Solutions. A
This is
business.
the company that manages yeast strains for how many other distilleries?
Hundreds.
Yep.
So we were pretty much busy in our day jobs. So we weren't, that busy or in a hurry to just rush something to market. So it allowed us to really sit back and focus on quality. And when you look at the Bottled and Bond Act, like we just talked about, something that we were trying to do was to really highlight a different process, sweet mash. We were trying to highlight really the quality of the whiskey. And we couldn't think of a better way to accentuate that than a Bottled and Bond, because it really is the mark of excellence.
Well,
in
new
terms of
producers normally are going to source, or they're going to come out with something that's less than 4 years old to, keep
Explain
their
what
business.
sourcing is for viewers that may not understand
So
what
that's
that is.
where you're buying whiskey from another distillery. If you're just starting a new distillery, historically it's been very common to source or buy whiskey from another distillery so you can get your bottles on the shelf and start generating some revenue. And, it was just kind of a mark of excellence for us to wait till ours was Bottled and Bond, which shows we made it ourselves, and it's also minimum of 4 years old.
Now, Pat is a PhD in microbiology, is that right?
Yep.
So tell us the difference between the sweet mash and the sour mash processes. Hear it from a smart guy.
Yeah, well.
Not that you aren't, Shane, but
No, sweet mash basically, those of you who are familiar with sour mash, that is where you're taking a little bit of the previous batch. Very specifically, you're taking the leftover grain and the water after distillation and you're reusing that as part of your water source when you're mashing. That would be the sour mash process. And it's got a little bit of a sourness to it. If you stick your finger into the fermentation of a sour mash, it has a little bit of an acidic flavor to it because it is lower pH. So sweet mash, very simply, is where you just start with all fresh water in the mashing process, and you're not using any leftovers from a previous process. So even though that's technically not microbiology, you heard it from a microbiologist.
process engineering.
well, that makes it that much more credible. Process engineering, speaking of the engineer in the
mechanical
equation here.
Yes.
So-
Another thing we were talking about in terms of, I think, something we thought about early on with the Bottled and Bond direction was something that would help distinguish, our whiskeys being a little bit different in a very broad field, very large market. Even within Kentucky, there's a lot of bourbons on the shelf. And so being a new producer out of nowhere with industry experience, how are we going to stay relevant, stay in that conversation? And what's unique to us, we were talking about this before, is the resurgence of Bottled and Bond, that quality symbol. And so for us, it's always relevant in discussions. It's like a subcategory of bourbon, so it's like double coupon day at Kroger's or something. It's like, we get to talk about bourbon, and then we're also and we're talking about Bottled and Bond. So for us, looking ahead, it helped us stay more relevant in a very crowded field of a lot of bourbons.
Why do you think that's so important now? Because it's coming back. Heaven Hill did a great job of holding on to a bunch of Bottled and Bond brands, and they just were there.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden it's back. Well, Colonel E.H. Taylor, obviously, that whiskey too, but now you see small craft distillers getting into it. Why do you think it's so important and relevant now, as you say?
I think it's that cycle. It's the cycle where any industry starts off and it has something very coveted. That industry grows, and sometimes it may expand. The lines may get blurred, and then through the end of that process, we as consumers, or maybe the market, we kind of circle back to what we really enjoy or what we like more, and what we find those are mature whiskeys. They're back to a Bottled and Bond, because usually the Bottled and Bonds are very special. There's a lot of attention that has to go into that to make it a good whiskey, instead of just mingling a bunch of barrels from different seasons, different years to get a tasting profile. And it's pretty easy to kind of get that, because you can just pick from all different areas and keep that. But to keep a flavor profile on a Bottled and Bond, that really comes down to the distillery has got to be doing its job.
Because you've reduced our options so much at that point.
And the whiskey has to stand on its own, especially if it's a Bottled and Bond single barrel. Now we're at the pinnacle of that, which is our whole product line of our wheated bourbon. And so I think for the consumer that has ran the journey you know, with all the new whiskeys, the craft whiskeys and different things coming on, when you find a whiskey in that category, you are kind of safe to say, I can buy that, go home, and I think I'm going to enjoy it.
For 5 generations, over 100 years, our family-owned company has sourced quality white oak for staves and cooperage. Our craftsmen and women are the heart of independent stave company. Their skills, paired with equipment designed by our own engineers, shape the staves into barrels, ensuring quality at every step. We partner with distillers to find the perfect toast and char recipe that will develop specific flavors while aging their unique spirit. From our classic charred barrel to our innovative small batch series, ISC builds custom barrel programs for distillers who craft the world's finest spirits.
How much credit do cocktails deserve in this discussion in terms of really benefiting from Bottled-in-Bond and playing a role in the cocktail resurgence in the United States? I mean, a lot of people give Rittenhouse a lot of credit for that, right?
Yeah, huge.
Higher proof bourbons and rye whiskeys, you know, in general, I think people gravitate towards those for cocktails. But yeah,
They just stand out more in a cocktail.
yeah.
And again, bottled and bonds are kind of that staple for a bartender for a reachable.
I don't understand the crowds that say, you know, high proof, you like 120, 130, whatever you have around these barrel proof spirits. It's like, oh, that's a waste to put in a cocktail. It's the best cocktails going.
Yeah.
It is.
I like that punch in the face.
Yeah, because you're able to differentiate what you're drinking. It's not just kind of muddled in, and you're just like, oh, wait a minute, I need to not only pick out my aromas, but I need to pick out my alcohol, right? So, you know, I think, and we're high proof guys. You know, we start at 100 proof and go up on our whiskey.
Which is another great conversation. You know, you talk about barrel proof offerings that are, you know, in the 130s versus barrel proof offerings like our rye whiskey, for example. That is, this one, particular one's 99.8 proof. So that would have been one that went into the barrel at 100 proof. Yeah.
Aged them probably a lower floor.
Yeah. I've never
barrel entry
seen one of
proof,
yours at that
yeah.
low proof. Usually it's around 115, right? Sometimes
Yep.
112.
So typically we age our ryes on our upper floors, so they get a lot hotter, they evaporate a lot more, but we also have a series of, through experimentation, you know, analysis or paralysis by analysis.
Or just drinking.
But we have a lot of
best kind of
barrels.
research.
You know, we have 6 floors in the warehouse, so we have barrels everywhere. And so some of our lower floor barrels actually are lower proof, and they, you know, again, just an amazing.
And we
approach.
also went into the barrel at different proofs starting out. So some of our single barrel strengths, like this one here, is actually below what we barreled it at. This would have been barreled at 100, and it came out at just a little less than 100. Yeah. Whereas the ones that you'll see that are 113 to 115, those would have went into the barrel at 110.
Yeah, we knew where we were going with our bourbons at 110 entry proof. But our ryes, we really just didn't have a lot of experience. So we started off 100, 105, 110, all the way up to 120 for our first year and a half.
Is there any ideal proof for Bottled-in-Bond that you found?
105 to 110 is
you
our
wanted to-
sweet spot. And when I say sweet spot, you know, I'm a sweet tea drinker. But I mean, it brings out the sweetness that a lot of people associate with our whiskeys from our barrel, from our grain mix. That's the magic proof.
Also, you know, if you consider that Bottled-in-Bond has to be bottled at 100 proof, if you're coming out of the barrel at 135, you got to put a lot of water in it to get it down.
Right.
So if you're coming out like we are, 113 to 115, we're not really putting that much water in there that didn't spend any time in the
You're
barrel.
starting with a great deal of water too. So talk about why that influences the flavor so much to have water in there doing a lot of the dissolution of those sugars versus alcohol. I know there's a big difference in that.
So there are chemical reasons why you want to have a certain amount of water in there. I mean, some of the extractants that are coming from the barrel are alcohol soluble, and some of those are water soluble, so having that balance in there. But, you know, I think for us, when we talked about it initially, we wanted to have, we knew we were going to be doing barrel picks that would be at barrel proof. We knew our rye was going to be offered at barrel strength. So we just wanted to have something that, I mean, I'll go to a 135 proof every now and then, but it's just hot, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, that aspect of it, we wanted to have barrel strength offerings that were at a lower proof, plus the whole chemical extract thing. There's also, you know, evaporative loss is related to the alcohol and the water ratio. But, you know, getting back to bottle and bond, having a lower entry proof also is going to be less dilution to get it to 100 proof.
And that's kind of ideal, right? Because it's that much closer to a barrel proof whiskey or barrel strength. Yeah.
And that's really kind of our goal. Like if you look on the back of all of our bottles, you'll see non-chill filtered. And basically what that comes into is we really enjoy everything the barrel gives us. Now you can manipulate that barrel to give you some bad things like tannins and tannics, you know, and those are, you got to really manage those barrels on those upper floors and you entry proofs and those type of things. But we really are trying to highlight and extract the right things out of the barrels. And to do that, you got to have a lower proof. You got to have that mix of alcohol and water, time, temperature, you know, all the variables that we all really challenge ourselves to come up with. And to me, that's what makes the bottle.
And speaking of
really
tannins,
special.
you know, we get barrels that are, the wood is air dried for an extended period of time prior to construction of the barrel. Yeah. Probably a lot older, more air drying than a lot of.
And that breaks those tannins down, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it leaches all of those out. You know, so those are sitting out, stacked in the outdoors for 18 months. So it's gone at least through, you know, definitely a summer, maybe 2 winters, depending on the season. A lot of rain. So, you know, if you look at the ground underneath those stacks, it's colored because, you know, a lot of that's leaching out. Well, a lot of that
that's
leaching
cool. I've never
out-
seen that.
A lot of that leaching out is some of those things that we don't want in our whiskey, right? The greenness, those type of things. So when we get our barrel, it's 18 months of air-dried wood, and we got immediate access to those sugars. So even like our rye, which are normally super overly spicy, you find our rye has that balance of sweetness in there because we're getting that access to that sugar on day one, and then, you know, it's hyperbolic. So the more sugar that we get on day one, the more we're going to get out at the end of the cycle.
That's so cool. Speaking of sugar, let's talk about what we're drinking here. This is your 6th year.
This is our 6th year.
This
yes.
is your oldest expression so far, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We've got some that's almost 7, but this is the oldest we've got in bottle.
Yeah.
I got to taste this last year. Wilderness Trail hosts the Kentucky Barbecue Festival on its big campus, beautiful rolling hills. There's, you know, rick houses in the back and the distillery in the foreground, and we get to have some just pulled out of the barrel samples that morning for a little seminar, and it was amazing back then. And this released, what, 3 months ago? Is that right?
Yes, right around
So the cycle
time of the...
is pretty slow, isn't it? Even though we were tasting it then, did you want to wait a little bit more, or is it just that long to get it to bottling and TTB
We
approval
knew we
and all the
wanted to
good
have
stuff?
older expressions beyond our, you know, our bottle and bond are typically 4 to 5 years
5
old.
years old, yeah.
And so, I mean, our goal is to get to an 8-year, a 10-year, a 12-year. But the 6-year, you know, we would have waited for it to be an 8-year if we needed to, but it kind of turned the corner at 6 years, and you're getting kind of, for lack of a better word, some of that oldness, kind of that old flavor. You
Must,
know, that you get,
maybe?
Yeah,
Barrel
kind of.
must?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I
don't
can taste
taste
it.
it
I
there.
can taste it in here for sure. And we just felt like it had turned the corner enough to where, you know, we could bottle it.
Yeah,
and
starting to
be
get that
proud of
more
it.
complex balance of, you know, the oak in the barrel, and you're getting a little bit more of the kind of the smoothness out of some of those stone fruits and different
And
things.
what was getting musty at year 6? by 8 might come up to something really cool, right? Because the chemistry in the barrel is a whole different matter that's out of your control, but you know it can happen.
Right.
Is that kind of exciting to see? Well, I don't trust you right now, but in 2 years, we might be friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right?
Well, you know, it's really unique. When we set out from the beginning, 6 to 8 years was actually our release target. And it wasn't until Bill Thomas with Jack Rose was climbing around the warehouse, you know, trying to drill every barrel we had. And this was to us at a young age, and we're starting to hit 4 years old and this, and he's just like, why are we sitting on these whiskeys? These are phenomenal.
And at that time, they were only 3 years old.
Yeah, 3 to 4
He was
years
like, you
old.
guys need to put this in
And
the
we were
bottle.
just like, you know what? You know, we weren't even thinking about it. You know, like, I got a road trip tomorrow. We're not worried about it. And so we really started digging deeper into them and found that hey, you know, the expressions are starting to open up a lot differently. But we're still on our track for our 68-year window. That's really, once we hit kind of the 8-year, really what we expect is when you see a bottle of Wilderness Trail out there, you're going to expect it to be in that 6 to 8 year window.
Oh, that's cool. That's exciting.
That's
Especially
our goal.
this is fantastic. by the
Most
way.
of our whiskeys today are in that 5-year category, so we're almost there.
So, before we close, just tell us a little bit about the distillery. I mean, the first time I saw it, I don't know, 5 years ago. It was actually 5 years ago this summer. It was this little Potemkin thing, you know, little bitty still house, little bitty rick houses.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't realize it was that small till he got up and saw it. And then I come back last summer, and it's giant. Everything has grown. So your growth has been rapid. How many barrels a day were you putting out in those early years versus like 220 a day now or 240 a day?
Well, we're family owned, so it means
His family and his family.
which
That's
means
it.
that we're broke, and so we like to kind of do kind of the stepping stone approach to our brand, and that way, like today, through COVID or anything else, you know, we don't lose sleep at night worrying about being a good whiskey on the shelf tomorrow. And so while that process has taken us longer to get where we're at, we're here to stay. And so we went from literally 2 barrels a day, you know, 7 years ago, to about 20 barrels a day 5 years ago, to 215 barrels a day today. And so it's all about, you know,
That's
every
7
year.
days a week now.
Yeah, we just reinvest back into ourselves. Every year that compounds. Today we have 6 rick houses on 168 acres. This year we laid down, you know, probably 54,000 barrels.
My goodness.
So it's all about, you know, just again, it's kind of like that savings account. You know, you put it back. It was $10 then, and 180,000 years later, it actually turns out to be.
It's a
you know,
savings
something you can
account that
retire.
only your children will benefit
Yeah,
from.
yeah, yeah. So I'm hoping my children have children, because my grandchildren, they're gonna make something one day. They're gonna be fine. But we enjoy it.
Shane and Pat, thanks for joining me. I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure our viewers will as well. Join us in a toast, people,
Absolutely.
to Bottle and Bond and Wilderness Trail.
Enjoy.
And
Thanks
the
so much.
Kentucky Bourbon Festival.
Absolutely.